Okay, so Tripp, one
Okay.
of the reasons I can't wait to see you is because of the Queen's tea set that you're
Oh,
gonna
oh
that you
yeah.
got for me, and you got it for me for the 70th anniversary, and now we've got this whole other thing going on. But I want to share with you, but while everybody's getting on, see, I actually have a Queen coronation mug from
Ooh.
1952. I guess that's when that was. Or well, the coronation itself was 53, June 53. So I have the almost 70-year-old coronation mug. And then I have this from the Diamond Jubilee, which was 10 years ago.
Oh,
So I think it's going to match your beautiful tea set. So I have these two wonderful, amazing mugs. And
I
then I have
imagine she stays on brand, you know?
they'll have to sell the brand out, you know. Isn't that terrible? There'll be a kind of a, you know, get rid of all the inventory sale, end of inventory sale, I guess now, something something to that effect, and they'll have a whole new inventory, and that's going to take a little while, of course, to get Charles. I don't know. I'm sorry. The Queen, she was sweet to have her face on these mugs. Look at that sweet face on the mug. I just can't really kind of get into the Charles face on the mug. I just,
It- yeah, it wasn't work the same. Maybe you'll put like his dog on it,
that would be
like a
nice.
cute puppy. Cute puppy. You're like,
Yeah.
wow. Or maybe he's one of like a bunch of his grandkids. He's like, look at all my grandkids. They're great.
There you go.
We
I
support the king. He's a
people
grandfather.
people keep saying to me, why can't you forgive him? And I said, there's not a woman named Diana in this planet who has ever forgiven Charles. And so, I'm just happy to hold a grudge.
You're like doing it for the namesake.
That's right. And the other thing is, you have your hat, and see, I have mine.
Oh,
This was my hat for the day, although I have to put there we go. There we go. There. See, I was ready for the funeral today. So I like my hat better than yours, by the way.
well, I'm just glad you're wearing that hat and I'm not, because
It doesn't work with the headphones.
no, it's harder. And yeah, once the second time when it's hot and humid in the South, the second time in the day I get sweaty, I just go to a hat because there's no return for the hair.
Oh, right.
It either
And
is just going to look greasy or I have to go wash it again.
right. Yeah.
It's just hard. Now, Diana, we have to start on time because
Uh-oh.
we're trying to get done without, you don't want to turn it into a normal homebrewed episode and end up here for 2 hours.
That's right.
So,
I got complaints last time that our recording was too long.
I'm
And I
like,
thought, oh, that's really kind of sad. But
I
that's
know.
all right.
I have I don't think I've had under hour episodes more than once a year, and I know 2 or 3 a week. It's,
Well,
I'm barely getting going. But
well, I love the podcasts that come along with the Bulwark, which is that kind of the Never Trump whole big sort of media company. They mostly run it off of Substack, and there's a couple of their hosts that do this one secret pod, and it is wonderful. It usually lasts about an hour and 5 minutes, and people who tell me that they're Bulwark fans and that they like our podcast, that what we do kind of reminds them of what Sarah Longwell and JVL from the Bulwark do. They just have this once a week thing, so they get together more than us.
I know.
But
well, look, when we double our members, then we can get together as many times as you want. You know how much more I prefer not traveling in order to pay bills, to staying at home, having dinner with family, and then getting to talk to you. So much good. Look, Nelson says, I use Tripp's podcast for bike workout, ensures I get a really good long workout. That's what I'm talking about. I suffer for your cardiovascular health. And see, I listen to podcasts at 2 to 2.5 speed, so they have to be long for me to really like savor them. If they're an hour, they're like 30 minutes. And I'm like, I was just enjoying it. So.
Well, I just want to make sure, Nelson, listen to the one that he did with Dom Crossan about Dom's new book last spring. I tell you, that must have been 2.5 hours long. I baked an entire cake while listening to that podcast. I was in my kitchen. I was just like going along, and it's like, my cake's done. It even cooled while I was still listening to the podcast. So.
Yeah, he said his legs ached after that one.
Oh, really? It was amazing. It was like, I never got so much money for, for a free podcast ever. That was the greatest content ever.
Oh yeah. See, it's always worth at least twice what you paid when you don't have to. All right. Well, I'm going to
let's get going. Yeah.
All right. Oh yeah. It's time to ruin dinner. And welcome to the podcast stage. Diana Butler Bass, here we go. How are you doing?
Well, I'm okay, despite my sort of, I was pre-budding or whatever it is about my hat, in the Queen's funeral. But I have this weird gift that not many people know about, but now a whole lot more people are going to know about it, is that sometimes I know things are going to happen in advance. I know. It's like freaky. Oh. And the night before the Queen died, I literally couldn't sleep. And I was just really, really restless. And I finally sort of fell asleep about 2 a.m. I woke up and I sat straight up in my bed and said, Queen Elizabeth. And I thought, what the heck is that all about? And I couldn't get back to sleep. I was really kind of weirded out by the whole thing. So I watched 2 episodes of The Crown on Netflix. And then I wound up and I fell asleep about, maybe 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up at 7:15 or whatever time it was, turned on Morning Joe. And there was Mika talking about how the palace had issued a statement saying that the Queen was gravely ill. So that was kind of strange. And so I've been sort of in this weird, like most of us have been on Queen TV and sort of thinking about, the past and what the end of this particular, reign means and how much the world has changed in the last 70 years. I mean, just kind of all kinds of interesting things. So that's all that's been my sort of main focus this last week. No Trump.
But you, just to clarify, you had nightmarish premonitions about the death of the Queen.
Yes, I did. And the night that she died, the night before she died.
And this is not a first time occurrence.
No, I have things.
Can we make a deal that if that happens to me, you don't call and give me a heads up? If you wake up and you're like, Tripp, like, just no, I don't need a real heads up. Maybe just text me and be like, just let your kids know how much you love them. See, now if you did that, I'm going to be thinking.
Well, the problem is that I usually don't have these kinds of things about people I know and love. I just have normal and human anxiety about people I know and love. And so like, Emma once in a while gets freaked out. Oh, Mom, you weren't, there's no weird premonitions or whatever. It's like, no, it's more about news stories or things that are kind of far away from my life or weird events like earthquakes. A lot of times I know earthquakes in advance. So anyway, it's just a strange gift. And it helps me understand why in 1644, I had an ancestress who was hanged as a witch in England. And I suspect that whatever this crazy gift I have is something that just sort of passes down through my family.
Well, one of the, if you do surveys with people, I think it's like just under 20% of people have significant premonitions. Around 30% or so of people say that within a week of a loved one passing, they have like a discernible personal presence or visitation. Like, it's fascinating how many things, if you are not like on the record with your name next to it, right, will admit to having experiences. and then cut them off. And the ones we don't admit to are the ones, whatever we might call the most accurate, thorough, rational account of the world has no explanation for in it. And so kind of contemporary, at least a dominant scientific form of reductionism, doesn't have ways of understanding those kind of connections that really kind of imply altered forms of connection than material connection. But those of us that love Alfred North Whitehead know there are other live metaphysical options. But see, we don't have to do a giant detour on that.
No.
But we will. We're having an actual process party at Theology Beer Camp, and no one knows who's your friend and special guest. So I feel like you should tell everyone how excited we are for super special fun on Bible night. The guest feature interview.
Do I get to say it now?
Oh yeah.
Is Libby Schrader, who's going to come. Libby is going to come to Theology Beer Camp and talk about the most recent amazing parts of her Mary Magdalene research. And she'll get it all right. No kind of, getting things a little slightly askew, like I would, because I get so excited about it. And I don't really understand biblical scholarship quite as well, of course, as she does. And so anyway, she's going to come and she's going to share with us in person. So we get to ask her whatever we want. And I know there's some new stuff going on.
Ooh. So
that'll be cool.
So on Friday night, when Libby joins, it's Bible night. So Diana and Libby are joining, and my co-host that evening is Pete Inns from Bible for Normal People, who, when I told him that she was coming, he's like, really? Oh, this is going to be fascinating. So like Diana and her at the same night? And I was like, yeah. And after that's when we have the Bible drill or the sword drill.
Oh my. I'm going to have to start memorizing verses and make up for all those years I grew up in the Methodist church and not a Southern Baptist church.
Well, if you were at a Southern Baptist church now and you Googled sword drill trophies on the internet, did you know that you can order special made custom sword drill trophies?
No, I didn't. But am I not surprised there are such
Look
things?
Look at the Bible hands and the Bible prayer hands across, but it gets better.
No. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
An American flag shaft on your sword drill trophy.
I'm going to memorize every single verse in the Bible just to win that.
I was like, this could go on the cover of Diana's next book on like the rise of Christian nationalism, and on the trophy, which again, they let me put this, and I was worried that the homeschool company was not going to print what I wrote because I figured they didn't want to ruin their witness, but they printed it. It says, I slaughtered all foes with the sword of the Lord at Theology Beer Camp.
Oh no.
So there's
Pete Enns is going to win.
Oh, no. He's emceeing it though. That's
okay.
That like we aren't letting actual Bible professors
play. Okay, good.
Either they're ringers or they lose and
they'll lose tenure.
And they're like, you lost to who? Oh, this electrician, but he listens to a lot of Bible podcasts.
Oh my
gosh. While he's working,
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Hey, come on, we need to answer questions.
Oh yeah. All right.
But that's a great thing. Libby and that trophy. What more could people want?
I don't know. But it should be fun. So I got here's the first question. We got sent a bunch, and I pulled a bunch of them that were specifically labeled for Ruining Dinner. And then I got this email from Jason just a bit ago, and I didn't get to send it to you, but it's specific about what we discussed last time when we talked about bad blood and such. Sorry for this coming in late. Let's see. We were discussing bloody religion leading to bloody society. Well, when you've recognized the connection y'all discussed, that the entire framework for most of Christianity is built on an ancient Near Eastern sacrificial system, that its underlying philosophy inherited from the Greeks is dualistic and world denying, that an affirmation of sovereign, all powerful God that controls everything is inherently anti democratic. What is left? I decided that I would have to leave Christianity behind. I just no longer see how it can be saved from those who embrace this worldview. Identifying as Christian just makes me angry all the time at almost everything. And for my own mental health, I'm leaving it behind to take the Buddhist precepts. Is Soto Zen Buddhism perfect? By no means, but it doesn't make claims about infallibility and inerrancy and the nature of God and the righteousness of its options.
It's Jason. That's from Jason.
Not our mutual Jason. This is a different Jason.
I was going to say,
and then, no,
that's from Jason Michelle. Is he pulling
your
our
husband?
legs?
No. This is a different Jason.
Okay,
and it was part of a long discussion in Facebook group about how he said how much he appreciated like the clarity of the problem that you pointed out, and it helped him see how so much of his anger is tied to this very dominant expression of the faith, that he, in trying to nuance and wrestle and trying to say, well, that's not, the ideal version or whatever. There's so much baggage and anger with it. He said it behind, and it went through this discussion. And I said, hey, message me about this, because like I'd love to pick it up with Diana, because I bet there are those who do have that anger and stuff. And then what do you do with it? And they feel guilty setting it behind. And then others who that anger sends you back in, and you get a bulldog version of lovey Jesus. Say like what you've done is like, I'm not leaving, I'm making space, right? Like in struggle. So like, how do you kind of process that difficulty where for some, the kind of harm and anger and frustration, they don't see how, what it would mean to stay.
Yeah. Well, I promised tonight that I would be brief. And so I am going to actually give the briefest answer I can to that question. And hopefully Jason will continue to pursue this, maybe at Theology Beer Camp. And the way that I think about that question is primarily that, yes, Western Christianity has dominantly been that. But I am still convinced that it doesn't dominantly have to be that. And it had all kinds of other possibilities, even possibilities that are within the New Testament. And there's this one lecture that I have given a couple of times in the last 2 or 3 years since Freeing Jesus came out. And it's a lecture on the diversity of views of who Jesus is in simply the epistles of Paul. And so we usually blame that bloody Jesus story on Paul. And that is primarily the way Paul looks at Jesus and the work of Jesus in the book of Romans. But if you just go over to some other of Paul's epistles, like you can contrast it, I think, with the Corinthian epistles, which go a different direction. In those epistles, Paul seems to be pulling less off of the sacrificial traditions of Judaism and more off of the liberation traditions of Judaism. And so if you're talking about Jesus being the sacrifice for our sins, you're going to see that in Romans. But if you look at the other, in Corinthians, there's more of an appeal to the Exodus traditions of theology, to equate Jesus with the liberation aspect of the atonement. And so there was one book I read when I was writing Freeing Jesus that said you could identify 7 different atonement theories in the epistles of Paul. And I went through and I looked and I went, oh my gosh, not only, are there 7 different theories, but there's, like at least 12 different images of Jesus. And only one of them is the sacrificial one. And so that makes me ask, why did we pull that one out and treat that one so like it was sacrosanct in comparison to these other potential images that there always were? And they aren't just in Paul. Of course, they're in all the diversity of early Christian theologies, and all the, how the early Christian communities didn't really have a single view of who Jesus was or what Jesus' work on the cross was. They shared some experiences about that. They shared it as being freeing. They shared it about being empowering. They shared it about being transformative in their own lives, giving them a sense of power and personhood and community and resistance and all the things that it gave them. But they didn't agree how that happened on Good Friday, or what Jesus' blood had to do with it. So that's my shortest answer I can give theologically, is that yes, I understand that there's this complete temptation to just say Christianity is just shot because it can't ever get away from that bloody theology, which creates a bloody sort of social structure. It has done that, but does that mean it needs to? And so I think part of the work of theology right now is pressing in to all of those other possibilities, to then ask ourselves the question is, what of these other possibilities that were always part of the Christian traditions, latent in the New Testament, or the edge traditions around Christian theology, which of those kinds of stories can make for the world we need going forward?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that's what I feel like I want to be part of. That's very exciting to me. Mm-hmm. And but if you want to choose a different path, certainly people are doing that, and I understand that.
Yeah, and I think part of it, if you didn't grow up in kind of a conservative evangelical space, right? Like even the way he ended the question about infallibility and inerrancy and these type of things, for those of us that are mainline Protestants, you often didn't talk about blood much at all, and atonement theories were not the dominant framework for thinking about your faith. So yes, you have familiarity with it from cultural Christianity, but not. It's not part of mainline Protestant piety in any dominant way. And but I being married to someone who was in a much more conservative part, there are things at the church we go to now that don't bother me at all, but because that language or imagery has baggage, for her, it's uncomfortable. And I'm like, yeah, but you can hear how they're using it. I mean, they just use like, the concept of righteousness to imply a deep critique of theo-capitalist order. She's like, yeah, but it definitely was talking about the righteousness of God, and that's connected to insert blood. Purity culture and insert blood. And I'm like, yeah, here's a fun bit I recently learned about why the sacrificial imagery was so popular, why that got picked up in the early church. Paul's, because yes, he has all these images, and if you were power ranking his, it's not the dominant one.
No, it's really just in Romans.
It is in Hebrews. It gets like the pictures there, and some people argued that he wrote it, he didn't, but he wrote prior to the destruction of the temple. After the destruction of the temple in 70, the early church is becoming more distinct from Judaism, and Judaism is cultivating its rabbinic form. And one of the live questions, both for Jews who had Jesus as Messiah, and then Gentiles, is what do we do when the cultic practice of the temple doesn't hold everyone together? And so there became Jewish and Jewish Christian reinterpretations of the sacrificial system to bind the community. And so in many ways, in his own context, Paul that's one of the many images. But then Pauline communities after the destruction of the temple look at those passages, because all Jewish people are going, what do we do without a temple? And then
because there can't be a blood sacrifice anymore. And I think that even if you're going to maintain that theory, people do it very badly, because the New Testament itself says that Christ was the once for all sacrifice. That was it. The end of blood, people. No more. And so what should have happened is that even if you hold on to that particular idea, the sacrificial blood atonement as being the nature of salvation on the cross, it was done, it was completed, it was over. And so it should not have become a kind of continuing, well, there's a fountain filled with blood. We didn't need it anymore. It was a past act. And the church should have been able to move into a sort of whole different vision of what all that meant because of those acts of reinterpretation that were going on at that time, because of course there was no place for Jews to do those things. And so, and on top of it all, early Christians were victims of a blood sacrifice kind of purity culture from ancient Rome. And so, it was their blood that was being spilled in order to cleanse the sort of the failures of the Roman Empire. And so it should never have become a continuing image. I think it in the early church itself, early churches, I always want to make sure I say it in plural. You and I both know that pacifism was incredibly strong in the early church. There was this complete demand on the part of the new believers that they never spill another person's blood. And so their commitment to pacifism up until about the year 200, they wouldn't let people serve in the Roman army. You had to give up your commissions. You had to declare yourself, to the emperor Jesus, not Caesar, and lay down your arms. And so the pacifism, I think, of the early church also tempered this sort of blood sacrifice thing. And I think that we could have had a whole different trajectory, but we wound up taking a very bad trajectory with it, especially when you get into early medieval Europe. I mean, that's where a lot goes crazy bad when Christianity, it was bad enough about when the Roman Empire takes it over, but it gets even worse when the Roman Empire gets taken over by pagan war tribes. Mm-hmm. So it's like the two worst cultural moments in the church are Constantine, and then when these, the Visigoths come down and they set themselves up as a new Holy Roman Empire. And I mean, the double whammy of imperial theology and Germanic warlords was about as bad as you could expect a trajectory to get for any basically still new religion.
Yeah. All right. I'm not going to say anything else because you're going to pick the next question. So I've sent Diana a whole bunch of questions. We're going to take turns picking them.
I got it.
And
I know which one I want to pick.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. So I have to read it out loud to folks? I guess I should. Okay.
Yeah, that way they know what we're answering. Otherwise, we could just tell them it was a perfect answer. And ruining dinner's like Jeopardy. Guess the question.
Okay, this one is for you. I actually love this question, and I can't wait to hear how you answer this. An ex-evangelical, this is the way it's framed, who previously prayed to God as if he was a genie in a bottle. And then this person says, now that I'm a recovering SDA, sad deconstructing atheist. I don't know. I'm thinking that's as good as guess as any. I feel sad that I no longer see the purpose in prayer. How do you approach this?
Oh, I mean, one, I would just say a lot of times.
Seventh-day Adventist.
Oh.
Sad deconstructing atheist.
I have to say, I both make sense. And but I do think that I think prayer is a wonderful, beautiful part of spiritual life. And if we image God in kingly, anthropocentric, omnipotent, interventionist, can we get some candy, please picture, then your prayer life is as deformed as your doctrine of God. And I would say the challenge for those who are growing and changing and how they understand God is to think through how do my spiritual practice and rhythms connect with the picture of reality nestled in the divine. And so for me, the purpose. Okay, a lot of mainline Protestants say things like the purpose of prayer is to change you, not change God, because they think, well, on the backside, what they're saying is like, we don't believe in interventionist deity that jumps in and breaks all the rules to show up here and fix something. And that creates a whole lot of problem of evil conversations about, obviously God is semi-decent, would have broken in and fixed some other things. But I want to say a bit more. One is, if you are any kind of panentheist, and I'm a unique variety, I imagine, but any of them where God and the world are in an interpenetrating relationship, where God does not have to break anything to arrive, then thinking about the presence and activity of God in the ways one cooperates, attends to, participates in, makes material the call, the lure of God, changes, I think, what prayer means. And if we think of even, so like in a basic one, things like contemplative prayer help you attend to how you drive your focus on any given moment and how you relate to it, how you learn to understand that you are actually not your thoughts, and that the most true thing about you is not the emotion that's hitting you in the present, but the source that holds all of you at once, and those kinds of things. But then when it goes to just praying, like about specific issues, if thinking back to your premonition story, Diana, if we aren't actually billiard balls, completely separate and autonomous substances hitting each other, but events of mass energy that are interconnected, then there are all sorts of ways we're connected to God and connected to others, which those attending to and directing towards the good, those relations become ways of thinking about prayer in deep ways. Surprisingly, if you take a panentheistic, open and relational perspective and read back through the New Testament, all sorts of teachings about prayer make more sense. Like pray without ceasing. Well, that's dumb. If what prayer means is begging daddy to show up and do something. If
Right.
praying without ceasing is attending to the offer of possibilities towards beauty, truth, goodness, justice, and I don't know, or letting the same mind be in you that's in Christ Jesus, so that you come to attend to moment more often and more faithfully, like is modeled in Jesus. These kinds of things. And I also think that there are ways that we are connected, that we can contribute to what God is doing in the world. Mm-hmm. And I think essential under that is the statement that God is always doing all God can do for the good. And more good is possible when we cooperate. And I think that's how I would nuance what a lot of mainline Protestants do. Oh, prayers to change you. Okay, yeah, it does change you, and it should. Hanging out with people changes your personality. Attending to the one revealed in Christ will hopefully, the Jesus-y vibe stick. But I think that picture assumes too much of a closed universe. And like one example's premonitions, but others there are all kinds of examples of people experiencing like the right kind of spiritual eruptions that don't make sense if everything's closed. Yeah. But sometimes we repress those experiences and want to explain them away because we think that if it happened once, God could do it anytime, anywhere God wants. And so let's stick with a normal kind of reductive mechanistic world, and prayer just helps us be better people. I think a better account of the world is every moment God calls each creature to the best of their listening ears and their fidelity towards beauty, truth, and goodness. And yeah, anyway.
I think that I really appreciate all that, Tripp, and it's like, in a certain way, enlightenment thought, what you're just calling the closed, sort of universe, thinking about prayer, makes us think that prayer is only like talking to God or listening to God. It's basically a capacity of our minds to receive messages in some way, shape, or form. And I find so much benefit in other kinds of prayer, and have for years now. Walking prayers, bodily prayers. Some people think that things like liturgical dance is silly, but it makes the point that dancing is prayer. Prayer is this, it is about all those things that you're talking about, a capacity, a way of being, a life with and in God that is responsive to this other reality that is around us all the time. And so it isn't like a vending machine, which is sad, the way so many churches teach that very thing. Yeah, and it's, I sometimes wonder how much bad theology around prayer has run people away from church.
Yeah.
I was on a plane one time with a guy. We were sitting together, and people talk to me on planes. I try to have my headphones on more lately because I like the quiet, but I've had some really interesting conversations. And this was a guy who found out that I wrote books about religion. He said, "Oh, I used to be religious," which is often what people say. And I said, join the club. Lots of people are. He said, I stopped going because I grew up in, I guess it was Assemblies of God. And he told me this very tragic story about how he and his wife had a baby, and the baby was very, very badly misshapen and had all these physical problems when she was born. It was a really terrible disfigurements, and she was disabled in ways that she probably would never have any kind of quality of life. And so the whole church, prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed, and the baby died. And so when they came to the church to have the funeral, the pastor literally said to this guy, he said, "Look at what you did. You didn't pray enough." And he said that was the last time that he went to church. And
that God shouldn't exist. Definitely an asshole deity. And not a good minister.
I mean, everything about that is so terrible. And yet, there's just a random guy on United Airlines telling me this story. And so you have to wonder, how much that kind of terrible theology is really present in our world, and how damaging and that is to people. And so the person who wrote us the question about the genie God, that's one form of it. God doesn't give you what you are asking for, even if it's something good, heal my mother, what have you. But this is the genie God taken to this really horrible extent. Whereas if the genie God doesn't do what you wanted the genie God to do, it's not even God's fault anymore. It's your fault. And so then you blame that poor person, and they just are like going, "Oh my God, am I faithless? Am I going to go to hell? What?" And I'd walk out too. I mean, that's not a church I'd ever want to be part of again. And if that's what religion is, and that's what he knew, that's what he was raised. He was raised with that theology. And so when the bottom fell out, it fell out to the point where the world collapsed around him. And so he just could never. He said he would never go into a church again.
Oh, I understand. Yeah. All right. I'm pausing from going back into a whole nother round of more finely nuancing my metaphysical comments earlier, because we're going to answer multiple questions, Diana.
Okay, so that was a great answer. So thank you. Bodily prayer, the idea of a different kind of reality around prayer, and even mainline Protestants. I just wanted to assent that the mainline Protestant answer, which the one I grew up with, is that prayer changes you, is a really good starting place, but it's not the whole answer. As you so beautifully pointed out, there's more to prayer than even that open door that more liberal Protestants give.
Yes. So if this conversation was interesting, people can send in more questions next time, maybe about thinking about anthropomorphism, or thinking about personal images of God beyond anthropomorphic crystallization, or thinking about the nature of divine action at the level of mind that prohibits the God who is spirit from being material. Those are little lures, you could say, to following up with fun philosophical conversations, Diana, because you're going to ask a question. I'm asking you a question.
You're going to ask me a question.
The fun part about this, I want to ask the burrito question last, because I think it's my favorite humorous question, and I wish I'd wrote down the names when I was cutting them after the out of the spreadsheet. All right. What is the best defense against white authoritative Christian nationalism and patriarchal white supremacy?
Oh, I've been asked this question already 3 times this week.
Well, in that case, you're practiced.
Well, I'll have to sort of back up and figure out how much of this I can actually say, because I don't want to betray confidence. The best answer that I gave in the 3 different times I was asked this question this week was to tell people that their lives are the best defense against that. And so if you call yourself a Christian, if you still trust this story, if you live into this story, if this story has caused you to be a person who is moving towards goodness and justice, and you take Amos seriously and all of the different kinds of things that we talk about here together, if that's your life and that's the way that you understand this story, you are the best defense against white Christian nationalism. If you're a white person. Now, if you're a person of color, you have a whole bunch of other defenses at your ready. But that's what I told this other person who asked me this question. The person who asked me this question the most pressing way this week is a person who actually grew up within Christian Reconstruction, the most isolated, intellectually controlling universe of white Christian nationalism. She grew up in it. And she said, I don't know what to say to give people any kind of hope. And I literally said, well, don't you understand, after this was pointed out to me by actually my husband, don't you understand that your life is the testimony that gives hope that there's a different way of being? Because she's not that anymore. And she grew up inside of it. She should be that. And yet she's not. And she's she is something much more amazing than what that universe ever can imagine. And so that falls on us then. We are the testimony. We are the proof of something opposite.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I wonder,
because you can't argue anybody out of it.
Right. I mean, I think if you look at the adjectives in the short question, thinking about authoritarian mindset, patriarchal, nationalism, right, and these things being warped into like deep associations with Christianity. I think for me, all 3 of them demonstrate the way a very perverse picture of power has come to dominate parts of the church. And the cure in some sense is the cross, right? Like if you are going, like when we manage to talk about the ultimate mystery of all existence, we tell a story about a Second Temple period homeless Jewish prophet who's executed by the state.
Right.
And then you're like, that's awesome. So how's this connected to being an authoritarian Christian patriarchal nationalist? And you're like, it's not. Right? Like in so much, like if God gets to tell us who God is, and God reveals God's self in the flesh of the person Jesus, and he does what he does, like so effectively, the domination system that cooperated across politics, society, culture, and religion was like, I'm taking him out with the cross. And that is the symbol of the defeat of principalities, power, sin, law, death. Then in some sense, right, like when we see perversions of the faith that think we are being more faithful when we build crosses rather than bear them, then we should just go, it's not Christian. Not that it's heresy, but right, because those pictures of top down dominating power are exactly what took Jesus out. Yeah. Like if you were trying to invent a symbol to show that you are Lord and no one else is, and I don't know, we're pissed about revolutionary Jewish preachers then you would use a cross if you were Roman. Like, that's how you would do it.
That's your
like,
power.
Right? You're like, we will death.
That's right.
The resurrection is literally like God's yes to the principalities and dominating systems, no to the image and invitation of love that we see in the body and ministry of Jesus. And so, like, I think it's beautiful anytime we struggle with those questions, especially as people of privilege in the West, because we know that we have been socialized to think top-down power systems make sense because they're what preserve our power and our privilege in our world. And so, like, when I get asked these kinds of questions, and I, probably say something theological or whatever, I'm usually follow up with, at what point did the world that came interpreted through this perverse picture of the Jesus story start to tear apart from what's there in the biblical witness in your own experience? Like, what was it that generated that separation? Because I think a lot of people in that space are there because they've encountered the divine through this perverse formula. And they think in order for the experience with God to be real, this whole bucket of ideology comes with it. And when you see people set it aside and then wrestle with it, I'm always fascinated by, like, what made you realize the good news was so good? It didn't need to be this kind of top-down nationalistic, patriarchal, authoritarian BS. And it actually is more cruciform.
That's why I think that our lives wind up being the best witness over and against that, because the very fact that some of us escape that fate, that theological sort of imperial brainwashing fate, the very fact that we aren't there means that there's something else. And so I think that is something we don't often think about as a resource. If the narrative of the top-down, authoritarian, racially superior, male in charge kind of Christianity, if that was the story, it would have, by now, certainly, successfully wiped out all other stories. And that all of these other stories, and it's not just us, we can find people who got away from that way of thinking throughout the whole history of Christianity. And those people usually wind up being our heroes. Nobody has a statue of Innocent III in their flower garden, but everybody has a statue of Francis of Assisi. And that, to me, is one of the things that proves that the authoritarian, white nationalist, horrible story that seems like it is so powerful and is consuming everything right now, if that story really had as much power and as much hold on the life of Christian faith as what we think it does, Francis would never be remembered, because he was one of those people who woke up. He was part of the privileged class. He was the son of one of the richest guys in Italy, and he saw the problem. He saw about the problem of blood atonement. He saw the problem of wealth. He saw the problem of power. He saw the problem of hierarchy. He saw the whole thing, and he tore off his clothes and walked away from it. And that witness, it's the witness of his life that becomes the protest against the heretical narrative. And when it comes down to it, who do we like? We don't remember the Pope that he had to go crawling to for permission to have his order, and that for goodness only knows what reason the Pope said okay, because the Pope was already at that same time going after all kinds of other people who were saying similar things, but he liked Francis for whatever reason, and he said, yeah, this guy's okay. I'm not going to kill him like I'm killing all those other people up in France. And so Francis' story survived, and not only does it survive, it thrives. And now What's the Pope's name? See, the Pope right now understands this, even though that poor Pope has to sit there over in Italy, encrusted by all of that horrible story. You can tell by the name that he picked that his hope or his vision was to start peeling away the heresy and revealing the truth of the matter. And the truth of the matter is the church, the faith is not about the power. It's about the powerless, and the humble, and the poor, and the outcast, and everyone who the system is trying to destroy. So anyway, yeah, that's one of the reasons I love being a church historian, is because my job is not to keep track of the guys who were all the popes and the powerful ones and the ones, that usually wind up in our church history pages. But my job is to go and scour the landscape and try to find the untold story. And those untold stories, if you put enough of those together, we have a witness that is extraordinary, of a different kind of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that.
And we do it we can do it every day in our own lives too. I mean, we should be doing this every day in our own lives. We are the witness. We are the testimony. We are the story.
All right, you get to pick the next question.
Oh no!
Look at us. We're making.
I'm preaching now.
I know. You see, it's complicated. This having questions and getting excited. I regularly do. Sometimes I get excited when asking questions in interviews, Diana, and forget where I was going.
I know. I do too. That happens to me all the time. Okay, I think this is a good question. This one just sort of breaks my heart, and it's a good question for today. I think because so many people were thinking about funerals and death. And this question is: I lost my mom last December and quickly realized that I don't believe I'll ever see her again. Is there any point of struggling to understand God and God's relationship to creation if this life is all there is?
Well, I mean, first, I think anyone that loses a parent it's going to have those experiences, and like to use God to cover over the grief that's necessary. I think, I mean, if I was God, I wouldn't be great. I wouldn't want anyone to do that. And I think that when it comes to losing people who are that close to you, family, it's there's a pastoral counselor named Joseph Attig that wrote this book on grief. And it's one of my favorite books. And he used this image of losing a limb. And when you lose a limb, you have phantom experience and everything that's there. And that's something that lingers with you, because that part of you it's never completely gone. But you do ultimately learn how to live without it. Depending on what you've lost, you learn to accommodate, and different things become struggles, and then you learn different strengths. You relate to people differently because this part of you isn't there. And I found I was reading that book when I lost a number of the first time I started losing grandparents in my early 20s. And I think it's been really helpful and has since then. And so when I think of the she lost this individual lost their mother last December. We haven't got to All Saints Day since then. Mm-hmm. And so one, I would just encourage you to find a service so you get to hear your mother read. You don't have to be a member or anything. If it's any high church like Episcopal, UCC, Lutherans, we're getting to when it gets to the end of October, early November, usually, I don't know the liturgical calendar off the top of my head, you'll have the service, and it'll be almost all music, prayers, and the names of people that are present who lost loved ones that year read. Mm-hmm. And my experience is some of these questions, like what's the point of struggling to understand God and creation when I don't know if I'll see her again, and all these kinds of things, those are hard to ask in the midst of deep grief and pain. And so when you can't muster all that belief and you can't be confident of hope, one of the gifts the tradition gives are opportunities for other people to speak hope and share the grief. And those services are super beautiful. I've led them when I was working at a church in Los Angeles, but attended them whenever I can since then, and always turn in names. And so I would say that, given it's not even been a year, the other side of it, of thinking about, I would say, just like weird doctrines of God breed odd accounts of prayer, that same image of God breeds all sorts of crazy things about the end of life. So like in the same way that a lot of mainline Protestants go, prayer just changes you, right? Like doesn't change God, since we're looking at the genie in the sky. I think a lot of people downplay the possibility of postmortem existence because they have such a especially most they're more progressive, internalize a kind of reductive naturalism. And so I would put it this way, and these are, let's see, 3 short steps of 3 kinds of thinking about postmortem existence that broadly progressive mainline Protestant theologians and such have. One would say, let's say you never have future subjective existence in the presence of your loved ones, but the presence of your loved ones is objectively part of your experience and your memory and in your life. Right. And so they are always with you. The next step on that is that God knows everything that can be known, and each moment and each creature is objectively immortal in the mind and memory of God. The next step is that, and there's lots of nuances here, feel free to ask follow-ups later, but there are plenty of ways of thinking without the kind of weird late modern evangelicalese of thinking about centers of subjectivity, a personhood, apart from resurrecting zombies flying through the sky, or like, Hillsong worship service for eternity. And I would say,
I don't want to go if that's the case.
but for me, the reason to for confidence in subjective immortality or hope in it is because there are plenty of lives, and I don't think that this individual is sharing that their mother's that way. There are plenty of lives that are snuffed out early or linger on in trauma, that God doesn't get to use the word good if they only get the story of a victim. And so the goodness of God demands, in a sense, resurrection of some sort for God's character to be. And deep aside, that's how apocalyptic language emerges. Second Temple period Judaism. It's the theodicy question after the prophets aren't effective. And then you look at a material world with cycling empires, and they think the resurrection of the dead is necessary for the goodness of God to be preserved. Jesus adopts a lot of that language and reconfigures it in interesting ways. Paul does as well. So, but you see there, the affirmation of the resurrection came not because, I just want to see my mom again and we're going to have family reunions in the sky. It's because if God is good in a world that is unjust, at what point does the good world ever reflect the character of God? It requires the gift of what? New creation, making all things new. The sin law, death, and all things are subject to the Son to the Father. So what? God is all in all. If you start to look at the language, the thing gets perverted in this kind of shitty theology of genie God. The language is not, you get to have a family reunion later. The language is, in the end, the character of God revealed in Christ is revealed to be the God of history. What's required for that? What does justice look like? So my hope, I think the hope of the resurrection is the hope that God's goodness ultimately is justified by new creation. So anyway.
Did you watch any of the funeral today for the Queen?
No, I'm not.
I know you're not quite as over the top as, clearly.
Yeah,
I am.
Yeah, I'm a Baptist. I'm a Baptist who then hung out with Scots.
There you go. No,
I got all my Queen time for 3 years there.
You got a double whammy.
I've gone to her house a couple times for tea. She was never there.
That's right. She didn't show up.
Cora loves it.
But hey, I'm an Episcopalian. I had to go in for all the smells and bells and all the services and stuff and see my people at work. And the imperial theology is there, and that of course is disturbing, but there was this other thing kept showing up for me, especially today, and I was really surprised, and this goes with your answer so well, I think, Tripp. They use for the committal, which is the service, and the funeral happens in sort of two parts. One is basically a big kind of celebration of life and memory, and preaching a sermon that's essentially eulogy about the person. And that happened in the morning, and all of the heads of state, and that was all in Westminster Abbey. And then they moved the Queen's body across London to Windsor, where she was buried tonight next to Philip. But there's a service that comes right before the burial called the committal, and that's when they actually commit the body to God's hands for whatever happens after death. And the thing that really threw me was that they read from the book of Revelation. They read from John, from the whole vision of John at the very end, where the new Jerusalem descends, and there's a new heaven and a new earth. And there was something, when they were reading that, I don't think I've ever heard that passage read during a committal. I haven't been to tons of Anglican committals, so it might be more traditional than I suspect. Most people I know have been Presbyterian or Methodist who have passed away. But when they read that passage, immediately this idea of the Queen's body being just like every other body. I mean, one of the things that happened before in the committal while all this was going on is they took her crown off of the coffin. They took the scepter off of the coffin. They took the orb off of the coffin. And all that was left on the coffin was her flag, which is, could be anyone's flag, if you drape military coffins with flags, and the flowers. And so here was basically a body, just like any other body. And the text read over it was about the hope of a new heaven and a new earth. And I thought, damn, that is about hope for all of us, for every body. Now, we can't say that means that there's going to be a heaven that's lined with mansions and all that kind of stuff. That's the bad genie theology. But what it does mean is that there's this sort of there's the ever creative God who is moving constantly towards compassion and justice, whose desire and purpose is the recreation of this wounded, broken, damaged cosmos toward consummation, fullness, and everything being new. And that is what every body goes into. It goes toward that consummation. And so when I read this person's question, and I thought to myself, yeah, that we're in deep grief here. It's not even a year. And yet for me, when I think about our bodies being part of whatever that consummation is, that makes me want to deal more with a God who is present in creation rather than less, because the whole of creation is groaning toward whatever this consummation will be. And whether that means, we're all going to be walking around with these, what you were talking about, zombie bodies, flying through the air, hugging each other, and at some new household address on the other side of the Jordan. I don't think it's quite that, but it does mean that we live in God. That's the previous question about prayer. Our whole lives are prayer. And that, I remember Marcus Borg saying this so often as he got into his late 60s and early 70s, and it was shortly before he passed away. He had a premonition about his own death. He would say, I don't know what it is going to be like, except for one thing, that the Bible assures us that when we die into the love of God. And that holds me. And I think that this morning it was so beautifully somehow demonstrated in this really sad service. I mean, I thought that was the committal was the most powerful part of the whole, 10 days of mourning thing, because it was the most honest thing. It's just the body of a woman who did her best to serve God as she understood God to be. And in the end, her body goes back to the earth and awaits God's consummation purpose.
Mm-hmm. You know, something that, like, even the way you put that just connected in my mind. I think the kind of perverse vision of the afterlife that's connected to the like genie deity then sees postmortem existence as kind of like getting the golden ticket, or the like this exception to what's going on in creation that you need to get access to in this weird, whatever very limited atoning way. And I think the imagery, right, of going into the ground just like every other human being, and then reading the big cosmic picture, the images, the cosmic imagery, in many ways, the affirmation of hope after death is hope in the one who created things.
Right.
And I think when we think of the genie god and we have to beg and we got to get the exception, we have to get the escape, then we're thinking like there's like this a few tickets and let's see if we can get one. I want to be on the right team to get one. If our hope is an affirmation that the God of love who brought all things into being, who knows us, carries us, meets us breath to breath in this life, is the same God who desires to love us on the other side, and not just you, but your neighbor and your enemy, right, then it's actually the God of creation's character that is our hope and our assurance, not a kind of tribal deity who is selecting out the elect and picking out the few and this kind of thing. It's the and this is something I think early Calvin, before he got really angry, talked about, is that so often some of the other Protestant thinkers thought that redemption was set apart from creation. And he said that redemption is the recapitulation of creation. And then Schleiermacher picks this up.
That's the best part of Calvin. I actually wrote a paper on that in graduate school. It was published in the Westminster Theological Review about Calvin's idea right there. Yeah, I was like, the only thing Westminster Theological Review would ever pick up from me, but it was on Calvin and creation. The very point. That's the best part of him.
It is. Mm-hmm. It is. And yeah. Anyway, so I mean, when you were giving that imagery, I was like, "Oh, it's beautiful," because the hope isn't the exception. The hope is the character of the Creator God doing something worthy of being called Abba. And I'm like, well, in that case, right? Like, I was talking with a friend the other day who may listen to this later. So it was asking questions about hope and afterlife and all these kind of things. I'm like, that's not the question I lose sleep on. Like once you are confident in some way that the source of things cares about the world and knows it, then it's going to do what it's going to do, and as Christians, understanding ultimate reality thematized through Jesus, then I would more be worried about all the people I'm bitter at showing up. That was like, quick. Oh God, they're here. Moltmann had that line when we had the emergent theological conversation 15 years ago or so, Jürgen Moltmann, and someone said, Moltmann, are you a universalist? He goes, oh no, there's some people I never want to see again.
That's right. I have that list too. It's terrible.
God, on the other hand,
has a different idea about these things. Well, there's another, just sort of in ending this thought about death, that I think is really, I don't really love this subject, but it is so important. And God, if religion can't talk about death, what good is it? But if a friend of mine, her name is Mallory McDuff. She's a the practical theologian, environmental theologian. And she teaches at Warren Wilson College in North Carolina. And she wrote a book this year on it called Your Last Best Act. And what it is it was all about choices around death and what to do with your body after you die. And I interviewed her for my little podcast over at the cottage, little private podcast. And I didn't know what the book was about beforehand. And I freak out about talking about funerals and things like this. And there I was talking to her, and I read this book and I really loved it, because the truth of the matter is the Queen is going down to the earth. But, we have anesthetized ourselves to that. We've turned that experience into something that's very anesthetic and very different than what it actually is. And that is, if the Queen was really going down to the earth, the Queen would really be going down to the earth. And that is, she wouldn't be in a big, coffin in the middle of this tomb at Windsor Chapel, protected from the elements, and where her bones are going to be awaiting, what the old vision was, awaiting the resurrection. But, most people are buried. Most people who have died in history have died literally into the earth. And you want to see your ancestors, go out and look at the trees, because that is why I think part of our call to care for creation is that everything is connected, that the matter that makes up our bodies doesn't disappear. The matter that makes up our bodies turns to dust and participates in the actual organic recreation of this planet that we inhabit. In the same way that dust inhabits us, we become the dust that eventually turns back into the stars. And so it's like, oh my gosh, theologically it works. The vision of Revelation 21, it works. The Queen being lowered into the earth, it works. And the actual truth of our bodies, it works. And what I love about the last bit is that you don't even have to be a Christian or a Jew to honor that piece of it, because we can stand with atheists and post-religious people and people who have all kinds of different views on this, is that ultimately we all are dust, and that we see bodies again through the ways in which we care for the earth and its soil, and that we contribute to the ongoing flourishing of the planet. We do in our very deaths. And so that's just another really beautiful, really mystical way of thinking about how everything is connected, that is also science. And both of those things are true. We die into the love of God, and we die into the earth of which our bodies are part.
Well, I feel like we did good. We're going to end because, we're not going to go long. So everyone has to wait for next time to hear your answer to this wild and crazy question. Could Jesus microwave a burrito so hot that he himself couldn't eat it?
I just laughed at that question. We got a lot of questions today that were actually connected. There were lots of questions about the genie God. So if people kind of noticed that theme all the way through, they were all connected. But the microwave burrito question, I was thinking, how can we tie this back to the genie God question? Not sure.
Yeah, and a couple people mentioned things about Theology Beer Camp. I'll send out an email this week for everyone that's registered. Some of you probably registered after the first one came out. But with all the details, the thing I would just recommend everyone, you can stay closer and cheaper if you stay at an Airbnb. Just put the church address in. And now that we're 1 month out, a whole bunch of Airbnbs open up their spaces a month out because they don't like people canceling. So there's that heads up. But I'll send out an email. And remember, those of you that are part of Diana's the cottage donors, then you can message her and get a $100 discount coupon. If you're not part of that group, well, you should join and then go get it.
It's also been in I've put it in 4 or 5 now of my recent private emails to Cottage Insiders.
There you go.
So if you are already a paid subscriber to the Cottage, you should have emails that have that code in there, the super secret code for Cottage Insiders, $100 off of Theology Beer Camp.
And if you're not, you should just become one and get it, or use Ruining Dinner with no space for $50 off.
I'll send it out a couple more times too.
Because somebody is going home with this doozy, and you may be saying to yourself, I can't imagine not having a cross with prayer hands and a Bible on top of an American flag shaft trophy. So, I'm just saying.
Someone did ask me, Janice Valder asked, what was the name of the book I was referring to?
Oh, yes.
Mallory McDuff is the author, and the book is called Our Last Best Act. And I highly recommend it for congregational study with churches that have older congregations or senior groups that are very active in the churches. It gave me things to think about that literally I never thought about. And it's all about using our bodies as an act of justice toward the earth and towards the people who come after us. And I was just deeply moved by it. I've had fantastic conversations about it. And I'm 63, so I'm at the kind of the newbie stage of thinking about these issues. But people I know in their 70s and 80s have really, 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 really appreciated it. It's caused some great theological and ethical reflection among people I know who are wise elders among us.
All righty.
Yeah, it's a good book.
All right. Well, thank you all for hanging out. And we'll see you all again next time we attempt to ruin dinner by, ruining the genie god.